All In Sports Network. We love sports.
Hey, everybody. Welcome into another episode of All In Aggies. Ben Peck to take you through it. On today's show, we dive into a few different topics. We'll touch on the Aggies coming back from their week off, taking on New Mexico State. Sorry about that. I had something in my eye there. And then we'll touch on Le'Veon Moss, his replacement moving forward. And then we'll talk a little Aggie basketball as they take down Lamar last night at Reed Arena. Before we get going any further, if you haven't already, if you enjoyed the show, maybe you've seen some of our episodes or clips, be sure to subscribe. We have a lot of y'all that are viewing but not subscribing. We would really appreciate it. We want to try to make this the best channel we can and provide the best content we can for you, not just me talking here, but also some on-the-ground reporting. And really for the future of that in the long term, your support means a ton. All right, let's talk about, I guess, the big topic at hand. With Le'Veon Moss out for the year, we touched on this a little bit yesterday as well, I believe. But, or I guess yesterday we were talking really about the SEC. Le'Veon Moss, of course, out for the year, went down fairly early in the South Carolina game. Amari Daniels comes in, plays pretty well in place of him. Although I will say, he had the big touchdown run on a 3rd and 1, kind of a boom-bust play. But then after that, South Carolina did a really good job holding A&M in check, and then the Aggies were just down so much that they couldn't really, go to their bread and butter and establish the run game that they would like to, the way they would like to. But it does raise an interesting question moving forward. Obviously, Reuben Owens out for the year before the season even started. Then Moss goes down. What does the run game look like, especially if it is, in fact, going to be Marcel Reed moving forward, as we saw at South Carolina? Even if it is Connor Wigman at times, how much more do we see Connor Wigman using his legs if he's in there trying to, create a little bit of versatility for the Aggie offense? Just a real quick recap of how the season's gone, in case you're wondering. Obviously Amari Daniels and E.J. Smith have been in the mix before Moss went out. To this point, your leading rushers after Le'Veon, who was at 765 when he went out. You've got Amari Daniels at 466, but he had, I think, 83 against South Carolina. So heading into that game, around the 380 mark. And then E.J. Smith at 107. Marcel Reed's actually your third leading rusher at 334. Now, that was after the South Carolina game. But just shows you how effective Marcel Reed's been in limited time, that he's your third best rusher, with Le'Veon Moss in the picture. So now he's going to be probably your second leading rusher. So moving forward, are we likely to see, I think there's a good chance we're likely to see him be the second leading rusher the rest of the way out. I guess what I was trying to get to, because Amari Daniels, even though he was behind him, that was in limited action. So if it had been Marcel Reed from the get-go, I think you would see Marcel Reed maybe closer to 500 yards rushing by this point in the year, with Amari Daniels at 466. So I think we could see a lot of Marcel Reed moving forward, more of that. And before I get too much further with my thoughts on this, we want to hear from Mike Elko talking about not just E.J. Smith and Amari Daniels. What does that balance look like? But also, what does the balance of the quarterback run look like moving forward?
How do you see that going? Is it going to be Daniels more of a workhorse back in that situation?
I think, again, we continue to talk about this. I continue to try to be vague as you try to get me to give away the game plan. But I think we're gonna. A lot of things are on the table. I think we've got to, obviously, losing Le'Veon's a big loss. That's a lot of touches. We're gonna have to figure out the right way to handle that. And I think there's a lot of different opportunities and options for us to go about it. Amari is certainly one. EJ is certainly one. There's other ways that we can do that. We can throw the ball more. There's other people we can use. And so I think all of that is very much on the table moving forward. But I think just the way we look at it is, we've got to replace a lot of production, and I don't think you can replace it the same way. I don't think we certainly don't have a back that's going to step in and be what Le'Veon is, to kind of go along with what we had from Amari and what we had from EJ already. And so we just got to figure it out. A big part of it's going to fall on Amari, and then we'll see where the rest of it goes. I think what we've got to do is we've got to figure out how to replace Le'Veon. and all of his carries and all of his yards. That is certainly an option. I think we've utilized Marcel and his legs. Even when Connor plays, I think we utilize his legs to some degree as well. I think you look and you try to figure out, okay, here's what we have now. How are we going to effectively move the football?
So there you have it. Mike Elko talking about Le'Veon Moss replacing him, and then you've got the quarterback. How much of it do you fill in with the quarterback thing there? The other thing that raised my interest that he kind of touched on is seeing more from other people and getting more creative with the other weapons. Because after E.J. Smith, the next running back, sort of next man up, would be just pure running back, would be A.J. Donata. And, he's been fine when asked to play. He hasn't had to see the field for that much of like high leverage situations. But, if after EJ, that's your best option as a pure runner, I think we will see some of him. But also catching my eye is going to be, Terry Bussey. How much does he get involved in the run game? Do we see more jet sweeps to him? Do we see him line up at running back? I don't know that we see that, just because he is kind of he's a small frame guy, and he's got a lot going for him. I thought he was kind of coming into his own in the receiving game, so I don't know that you want to sign up for him to take a massive beating in these last few games down the stretch in the SEC. Maybe we see a little bit of it against New Mexico State, just a little wrinkle, or maybe like a play or two. I mean, the kid's only 6 foot 195, I guess is what he's listed. He looks smaller than that to me, to be honest. But obviously he's an electric athlete, ball in his hands. Yes, get the ball in his hands, but I don't know as like a pure runner if that's how I see him, especially the way they designed that run game, where I feel like there's a lot of value and emphasis on like just being a strong running back. And I don't know that is exactly like running into the teeth of the defense, right? Rather than around the edge. I know there's a little bit of that, but I feel like Le'Veon Moss, Amari Daniels more so fit that mold, even Reuben Owens, than Terry Bussey, just in the natural sense. And then, Jabri Barber is a guy who I'm thinking of guys who could A&M get the ball out to quickly, bubble screen or those high percentage completion throws, the ball in space, end arounds, what have you, that could make some plays. I think Jabri Barber fits into that mold. I think Cyrus Allen fits into that mold. I think Noah Thomas and Ja'Day Walker are more like downfield receivers, in my opinion. And we just talked about Terry Bussey. Trey Watson is a guy who maybe on some tight end slip screen action deals, maybe you see him a little bit more. But that's kind of where I see it at the moment. We will find out some against New Mexico State, although I don't think we'll get all the answers, because it is New Mexico State. You've got a game at Auburn coming up. By the way, that's going to be a night game, the last game before Texas comes to town, and so much riding on that Texas game. And we'll see what A&M can do and how they, navigate these choppy waters. I will say very excited about the running back room for next year. If Le'Veon Moss does decide to return and, forego any professional opportunities. And then if Reuben Owens will be back. But if you could get them together again, and I don't know what the timetable is going to look like for Le'Veon Moss, if he has a season-ending injury. But he did say, Mike Elko, that initially it maybe wasn't as absolutely terrible as we thought. So that would lead me to believe that he'll be ready by the time you get to the start of the regular season, or at least early on the regular season. And then Reuben Owens, that would be exciting to think about for 2025. But hey, one game at a time, 1 week at a time, one season at a time. Let's get through that, because the Aggies still have plenty to play for. On that note, the other thing we want to talk about is how A&M approaches these big games. And I asked Mike Elko yesterday, the build up to this answer that I'm about to play to you, And I didn't think about this part of it till after, but I used a baseball analogy to say, I understand the focus, the intensity maybe ratchets up, knowing that you're going into like the second to last SEC game and then the last SEC game with really your whole season on the table in front of you. How do you, get it through to your guys that this is it? It all comes down to this. I want you playing with your hair on fire, and I want you to don't leave anything on the table, while at the same time, not going into it to pick up on the baseball analogy. Like, okay, it's the bottom of the 8th or the bottom of the 9th. And, I'm going to go out there and just start swinging for the fences now because I want to make that big play and I want to make that mark. And I'm just going to play every single down, every single game like that from here on out, because I'm fired up and ready to go. Like, you still want to play the way and do the things you did along the way to get you where you are right now, right? Like, if you don't have to play out of yourself in that sense. So, I think I told him, I didn't say swinging for the fences, but how do you try to get them to treat bottom of the 9th at bat the same way you'd go through an at bat in the 4th inning or the 1st inning or whatever? And this is what he had to say. I thought it was interesting.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit like how we talk about big games, right? Like there's a process that allows for success, and you have to understand what that process is, and you got to stay true to that process at all times. But there's also an understanding that this is a little bit different, right? And how you control your emotions through that, how you control your energy through that, how you just emphasize how special the opportunity is that we have in front of us, and we want to take advantage of it. And I think all of that drives like the daily preparation to be higher, the daily routine, the daily performance to be higher is what you're trying to get accomplished. And I think if the kids can understand, okay, I've got to elevate within this process and push it to the limit within this process, I think that's what you're looking for. I think that's what, like you mentioned baseball, like bottom of the 9th, game-winning at bat, like that at bat feels different. You have to be aware of it, and then how you enhance your process, the breathing, the fundamentals, the mechanics to function in that moment, right? I think that's what you're trying to get accomplished.
So that was really enlightening. I knew he'd appreciate a good baseball analogy, being the father of a Division I baseball player. Shout out Mikey Elko. I believe in the Big Ten, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, I mean, listen, there's so much on the table. As he mentioned, you've got, you don't need me to tell you what's all on the table. Everything's on the table. College football playoff, SEC championship, national championship, potentially. But one game at a time, one at bat at a time, if you will, one pitch at a time. And, it also, I'll tell you this, it reminds me of, if you ever hear Pat Henry, the track and field head coach for Texas A&M, talk about it. He talks about how, track and field is interesting because at the end of the day, and I think football is similar to this, we remember, like in history and everything else, and reflect on the season as a whole, how it was and how it went based on one day, one meet, the national championships. If you have good performances throughout the year, this and that, good marks, but you come in 6th, or think about the Olympics. Maybe you're doing great through your season, but then you come to the Olympics and you finish 5th. People remember that. They don't necessarily remember that you had the best time leading up to that, and then you came in and didn't maybe perform terribly by your standards. It was maybe within the margin, but other people perform their best at the right time. And then that's where you get remembered. So what he talks about is you want people to, got to go do this the right way. You want people to just be on a steady incline here and there. And you want, you don't want to peak too early and then flatline. You want to peak at the right time. I mean, I know that's a thing that football players talk about as well, football coaches, but it is something where it's like, as much as you'd like to see a big jump, that's nice to the degree that you can maintain that level rather than a big jump if it's not going to be sustainable. So, you want to be able, you almost in a way, would feel better about being able to replicate it if you don't have these blips, and it's just like a slow, steady progression. Maybe not slow, but a steady progression week to week, month to month. Now, A&M's in an interesting spot because I think we were seeing that, right, a little bit. We saw, think back to the very beginning of the year. Tough start against Notre Dame. Then you handle your business against McNeese State. Then Florida, Arkansas, okay. Elevated, certainly the Florida game, especially handled that environment on the road. Arkansas, even though it wasn't pretty all the time, felt like they were never out of that game. I'm trying to remember. I guess they did trail at one point, but it felt like they were still in there, and you felt confident, and then they handled their business. Then you go to Mizzou, handle your business. Mississippi State, after a bye week, kind of get through it, but then LSU, you rise to the moment after stumbling. Now you stumble against South Carolina, but you don't recover the same way you did against LSU. So I do feel like we've seen that steady build. It'll just be, can A&M be hitting on all cylinders when the big moment arrives and the big games arrive that will determine, getting back to our track discussion, how people remember this team. People remember this team as a good team if they go 9-3, and they will remember this is a really good, really special year if they go 10-2, beat Texas, if they win the SEC championship game, or even if they just make it there, if they make the playoffs, if they do something in the playoffs, that will be infinitely better. And then we've talked so much about how that affects the perception of the program with recruits, transfers, everything else, and it just can start to build on itself. Because I don't think there are enough SEC teams. If you're new to the program, we've talked about this too. I think there's enough SEC teams that are in a good place that if you're just holding serve and everyone above you is doing what they're supposed to do and you're beating all the people you're supposed to beat, I think it's too crowded right now, where A&M started out with Mike Elko to say, if you're just going to wait for Alabama, Tennessee, and again, this is before the year, Alabama, Tennessee, LSU, Ole Miss, Georgia, all these teams to just stumble, and then you take advantage. Like, you've got to take it to Texas. You've got to take it to them, right? I don't think it's too deep of a conference to just kind of wait around and make your mark. Or it's not like baseball or softball where you play so much that every SEC team is going to make the tournament, and maybe, 11 of them are going to be a host in their postseason tournament, and you can make a run even if you're 8th, 9th in the SEC. That's not going to cut it for football. You've got to be in that top at least 5 to be able to make the playoffs comfortably, in my opinion. Even 5 might be a little dicey, but yeah, you got to take advantage, and you've got a good schedule this year and next year, but this year, especially with the games at home. So got to take advantage of that, and the Aggies so far are doing that. All right, before we go, let's talk a little bit of Aggie basketball, but if you haven't already, if you're still listening, subscribe to the channel, help us out, tell a friend, tell a family member, tell a fellow Aggie, hey, these guys are talking, or this guy is talking some A&M sports. I'm on the ground. I've got some highlights for y'all. I've got some stuff for all the different sports on campus. And like, just for example, next week, we're going to be at the NCAA championships for men's and women's tennis for singles and doubles in Waco. We'll have highlights of that. You won't really get that anywhere else. I can promise you that. Not that that is the absolute, every single thing you want, but like, we have a variety on the show is what I'm trying to say. Anyways, now getting to Aggie basketball. Back on track, and we're talking the men here. We'll touch on the ladies a little bit later on this week. But the men at home last night, they take down Lamar 97-71. They beat East Texas A&M 87-55. I believe that was since the last time we spoke about this topic. And encouraging signs. I don't want to make too much of it. It's two teams you should handily defeat. I will say they dropped to 23rd in the AP poll, didn't drop all the way out. And I just want to say something on the UCF game. I felt like I saw some people talking about that loss as a debacle and like, oh my gosh, A&M is in crisis. They're losing to UCF on the road. UCF might be, I would say, I don't know, more likely than that. I'm not so caught up on to speed on the national landscape, but they very well could be a tournament team. And, I saw someone call them a dark horse Big 12 contender. I think maybe John Rothstein, and he knows the stuff. So they were a 5.5-point favorite, A&M was, on the road. You know how many times 5.5-point favorites lose on the road in college basketball? It happens all the time, okay? So to call that like a disaster or like a massive upset is not correct, in my opinion. I think more, we talked about it, had a video up here, brutal start, really talking about that and the women losing to A&M Corpus Christi, which was brutal. But the more brutal part of the UCF loss was the way that they felt like they were in control late, and whenever you can't buy a bucket in the last 5 minutes and you lose by a single possession, that's what grates at you. That is the killer. But the actual loss itself is not, in my opinion, anything to raise alarm for. It's just like we talked about with football. It's starting off point, and you want to build from there and get a little bit better and progress, but it's not like losing at home to one of these teams, East Texas A&M and or Lamar. East Texas A&M, by the way, I don't know how I feel about it. I know that the A&M Commerce, I know that the name change was in the works for a while. I'll be honest, I didn't realize it was going to affect this year, but I guess Commerce, people don't really know where Commerce is. I mean, I have to look it up the first time I had to think about going out to a game out there covering some Division II stuff from a past life. But, do you go A&M Corpus Christi, A&M South? But I think Corpus Christi is a big enough town that people know. But I don't know. I guess you've got West Texas A&M, so East Texas A&M, it makes sense. But anyways, I digress. Getting back to the game last night with Lamar, as I mentioned, 97-71. We saw some good contributions from a variety of sources. I think the good thing since last time we talked, we were wondering if Hayden Hefner, if he's going to be able to get back in his groove and develop into like a legit 3-point shooting weapon. Struggled in that first game on the road. Lamar, he goes 2 for 6 from 3. You'll take it. And then he had a good game a few days before against East Texas A&M with a few threes there. So that was good to see. And I really want to talk about Zurich Phelps. He is a guy who was unavailable for the UCF game, neglected to mention that. Unavailable for that game. And he's come back, and he's been really good. I mean, he averaged 14 points a game for SMU last year and kind of can do a little bit of everything. 6'4" guard. I mean, who does this sound like? Remember, the two people you lost from the rotation last year were Wildens Levesque, center inside, and then Zurich Phelps. So keep that in mind. Tyrese Radford, one of the two people you lost. 6'4" guard who's averaging 4.5 rebounds per game, 4 assists in 2 games span at A&M. I must admit, small sample size, but limited playing time. And the last 2 games, 18 points in 18 minutes, and then 16 points last night in 28 minutes. He's been wildly efficient. Now, again, it's early, I know, but this is not something that's totally new compared to what he had to do at SMU. Something that I'm encouraged by is I like to see a guy who had to be the guy for his team and maybe wasn't the most efficient player, but he was their best option, so he had to put a lot on his plate. I like to see a guy like that come to a program like A&M where they don't have to have the volume that they did at their previous stop. They can maybe be a little more selective and see their efficiency go up. And even if their raw output declines. Similar thing I'm looking for with Jace Carter, with coming from Illinois, Chicago to A&M. And, we saw him kind of go through that. He's still a guy that I think is capable of, making contribution, not just contributions, but making significant contributions on any given night type of deal. And really, I think the question of this team this season will be, can they give enough help to Wade Taylor and enough help around Wade Taylor to where he doesn't have to do it all? So far, I'm pretty encouraged in the sense we've seen Pharrell Payne be pretty solid in scoring opportunities inside, which, by the way, was something that they really lacked last year. I know we don't really talk about it much or enjoy talking about it, but losing Julius Marble put aside the reasons why he was not on the team last year, but he was a big piece to have Henry Coleman, Julius Marble, Wade Taylor. I think he was on that team with Dexter Dennis. Like, you had a variety of scoring options at a variety of positions. Then you take him out of the picture. Henry Coleman was hurt for most of the year. Anderson Garcia and Solomon Washington are kind of chipping in a little more than they did, but really you had Boots and Tyrese and then sort of Jace Carter. Like, it was just, you really missed that interior presence as an option. If Pharrell Payne can do that this year, as well as Henry Coleman, and then Anderson Garcia is still in the post, you still get what you get from Solomon Washington. And then, that backcourt variety between Hayden Hefner, Wade Taylor, CJ Wiltshire coming in off the bench as well, Zurich Phelps. Like, you've got options there. You've got people who can, and I failed to neglect Manny Obaseki, who had a tough day against UCF, but he's played better the last 2 games. So now I think you have options to where, I don't know how tight that rotation will get. I don't know if we'll see some guys in, some guys out on a weekly basis or nightly basis if things just, undulate the way they do over the course of a college basketball season. But I feel relatively good about their depth of options to say, out of all those guys, you should be able to find, an 9-man rotation that can come together and provide to you what you need to be, a pretty good team night in, night out for the grind of the SEC. And I think it's good that they have depth to where if you do lose somebody for a stretch of time, it's not hopefully as debilitating as it was losing, Julius Marble to off the court stuff last year, or when they lost Henry Coleman, when they lost Manny Obaseki, I believe, had a stretch. Maybe I'm misremembering. But yeah, I don't know. I feel relatively good about it. 2-1, taking care of business. Let's see. Their next game is Ohio State, the Ross Bjork Bowl. Ohio State coming in on a Friday night on the SEC Network. It's not on Peacock this year, so thank the Lord for that. I'm not going to be able to be there, unfortunately, covering high school football, but we will certainly talk about it, debrief it on Saturday at some point. I'm going to try to do that Saturday before we get into football mode, actually. I'll try to put something out Saturday that morning, just talking real quick about that basketball game. Then we'll be back Saturday night to talk about how the Aggies look against New Mexico State. All right, that's going to do it for today's episode of All in Aggies. Be sure to like, subscribe, comment, let us know what you think about, I don't know, everything we talked about today. Who should the Aggies go for with the run game? Who, is A&M built for these big moments, these big games? A&M basketball, how do you feel about the last 2 games post UCF? We feeling better? We feel like we've seen the answers we wanted to see from A&M. I don't know. You let me know in the comment section, and we will be back next time here on All in Aggies. Ben Peck, thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe before you go if you haven't already.
All in Sports Network. We love sports.